Begin with a minute of concentration. The eyes close, I request. Observe breathing for a minute. Thank you. So, namaste. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Wishing everyone a very, very peaceful, healthy, and happy International Day of Yoga. And I would like to welcome for today's speaker, Dr. Ramesh Bijlani ji from Delhi Ashram, Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi, and welcome everyone, all the participants on board. Before we start with the session, uh, almost every one of us knows Dr. Ramesh Bijlani ji so nicely, but still I would take his permission to give a little, I won't say introduction, but the way we know him to our capacities. Dr. Ramesh Bijlani ji is a prolific writer and is an inspirational speaker too. He loves to use this gift of communication that he has received from the divine for dispensing small doses of love and wisdom from the inexhaustible pharmacy of Aurobindo and the Mother. Once a professor at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, that is AIMS, Delhi, he is now a spiritual seeker at Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. He's also received recently Prime Minister's Award for his wonderful work in this field. So, welcome once again, Ramesh Bijlani. And I would request you to please take over from here.
Thank you, Shekhar, for the generous introduction uh, and giving me this opportunity to be the first speaker in this series of week-long talks on yoga during the International Day of Yoga. Uh, Now, we are the followers of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and the yoga that they gave us is integral yoga. And that is not the only reason why we have this fancy for integral yoga. We find that there's something of value, something unique about integral yoga, which is not there in the other schools of yoga. There's something special about it. And that's why we have taken a fancy to it. But all the same, we find that when we actually go and talk about this yoga in any public forum where we have people from all walks of life, they get some hang of what we are saying. They appreciate it, they admire it, they applaud. But then when they go back, essentially for them, yoga once again becomes a set of physical practices, asanas and pranayamas. Now, why is it that they are not able to actually bring integral yoga into their lives? Uh, which means that they admire it and yet they do not accept it fully. Very few are those who accept it. So when we talk about it, very often we feel as if we are in a minority of one in a big group who is trying to talk about something which can be accepted as yoga, and yet they do not accept it as yoga. So it is with this sort of an observation that I came up with this title, Integral Yoga, Admired More Than Accepted. So with this little introduction, let me go to the PowerPoint. If you were to ask someone what yoga is, then a reasonable answer would be that's a combination of asanas and pranayamas and meditation, the yogic techniques which are considered to improve the function of the body and the mind. Asanas, primarily the body, pranayama, both body and mind, meditation, primarily the mind. I mean, that's sort of a rough division, although there's no clear cut boundary between the mind and the body. But then, what do these techniques really do? They improve the performance of the body and the mind, which are mere instruments. Now, improving the performance of the instrument is desirable, but not sufficient. And we can understand it through an example. A knife is also an instrument. It's desirable to sharpen it, it will work much better. But then, with the same sharp knife, we can chop fruits and vegetables, and we can also stab somebody. So, in the same way, here also the instruments which are being improved, the performance of the instruments which is being improved, can be used for something good and can also be used for evil. Now, what makes yoga a spiritual discipline is the fact that yoga includes not only these techniques, but also guidance on how to use these instruments. And the guidance is based on a spiritual philosophy, and that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. And if one follows that guidance, then one will not do anything wrong. If one really sincerely follows the guidance which yoga includes, which is based on a spiritual philosophy. So, what makes yoga a spiritual philosophy is not these techniques, but rather the guidance which it includes for using these instruments, which in turn is based on a spiritual philosophy. And since we are using these instruments all the time, yoga then becomes a 24-hour activity. And that is what Sri Aurobindo essentially meant when he said, sure, all life is yoga. And as a concept, it appears very simple and appealing, and people do accept it. But then, for sake of good order, because this may be seen now and maybe the recording later on by many who are not so familiar with integral yoga, I'll now spend some time on talking about integral yoga particularly. So, looking at it this way, yoga can be considered a combination of the techniques, asanas, pranayam, and meditation, and the guidance that it provides for using these instruments. The techniques are the visible part of yoga, and the guidance is the invisible part. The invisible part is occupying much more time. In a way, it's also more important, but that is what is not generally seen as an essential part of yoga, and that is what leads to this simplification of yoga to just the techniques of yoga, because the invisible part is not so easily seen, and therefore people tend to ignore it, neglect it, or consider it something which is just icing on the cake. The main thing is the visible techniques. That's the type of attitude people generally take. Now, let's turn a little more in detail to integral yoga itself. Integral yoga is a synthesis. The classic text that we have on integral yoga is the synthesis of yoga by Sri Aurobindo, and integral yoga is a synthesis. Now, in this work of his, he talks about what a synthesis really is. Synthesis is not placing different types of yoga side by side or their successive practice. Side by side would mean, say, if some part of the day is spent on asanas and pranayamas, we say, well, now we have practiced Hatha Yoga, then some time spent on meditation, we have practiced Raja Yoga, some time spent on doing some disinterested or selfless service, we have done Karma Yoga, some time spent on uh, singing some bhajans or listening to bhajans, devotional music. Well, we have practiced Bhakti Yoga, and we spent some time on reading a book on yoga or spiritual. We read spiritual literature or attend a talk, a satsang. Then we say that we have practiced Jnana Yoga. So we spend part of the time on each of these, and we say that, well, now we have achieved a synthesis. That is not what synthesis really is. And of course, successive practice, we can understand it's not only a synthesis, not only not a synthesis, but also extremely difficult. Who can really practice everything that is required, say, in a school like Hatha Yoga or Raja Yoga, go to the terminal point of that school and then start with another school of yoga? So, successive practice is both difficult or impractical, and also that would not be truly a synthesis. So, after talking about what synthesis is not, let's talk a little bit about what Sri Aurobindo has said is a synthesis. Synthesis is something that takes into account the central principle of all the systems of yoga that have been taken into account while working out the synthesis, and harmonizing the central principle with the unique features of each school. In case of yoga, the central principle of all systems of yoga is self improvement. Yoga is essentially a methodized effort for self-improvement, as Sri Aurobindo says. Methodized effort, which means there's a certain method about it. It's not a haphazard or random effort. It is a proper methodized effort which follows a certain proven and well-studied way of improving oneself, the instruments, the body, and the mind. But then that is not all. This is with reference to the divine. That is, the instruments should work in light of the divine. And if we continue moving in that direction, one would achieve an identity with the divine. That is, all parts of the being would have undergone a transformation so that now they are fully reflecting and acting in light of that higher truth, the divine, the highest truth, and that is the goal. So then one can say that one has achieved union with the divine. So this is something which is common to all systems of yoga. Sri Aurobindo took into account in the synthesis uh, a few schools, major schools of yoga. And now let's see what are the particular features of those, because synthesis is harmonizing the central principle of all schools of yoga with the particular features of each. So, the particular feature of Hatha Yoga is physical perfection. All schools of yoga aim at self perfection, but then self perfection can have at least two aspects: physical perfection and mental perfection. Hatha Yoga is the school that emphasizes physical perfection. Raja Yoga emphasizes, on the other hand, mental perfection. And then Sri Aurobindo has taken into account also Tantra Yoga, which emphasizes that uh, every way in which the divine has manifested in us can be used for approaching the divine. So, the divine can be approached through the world that the divine itself has manifested in. The entire world and worldly life are manifestations of the divine. All creation is a manifestation of the divine. And uh, that would include also the imperfections that the divine has equipped us with, or sort of the divine has not taken us to the point of perfection right to start with. He has left that incentive for us, that aspiration with us, that we would like to move towards perfection, but he has made us highly imperfect. And those imperfect things that he has planted in us can also be used for approaching the divine itself. Now, in principle, it sounds very good, but then one can justify a lot of things which are rather ridiculous. Like, say, the divine has planted violence in us, and therefore that can be used for approaching the divine. The divine has planted sex in us, and therefore that can be used for approaching the divine. And these type of attitudes have been taken by some, and that is what has given Tantra Yoga a bad name. But the basic underlying principle of Tantra Yoga is quite sound, and but at the same time, to enjoy all worldly uh, pleasures, every type of satisfaction that the divine has planted in us, and at the same time work towards liberation from our dependence on these pleasures is difficult. And that's why I think it is MP Pandit who said that to combine mukti with bhukti is both difficult and dangerous. But all the same, Sri Aurobindo has taken the fundamental principle of Tantra Yoga into account, and that is one of the sort of uh, reasons why the synthesis is extremely life affirming. Then Sri Aurobindo has taken into account the uh, triple path of the Gita. And in fact, integral yoga leans most heavily on the on integral yoga. So it leans most heavily on the yoga of the Gita. Now, what are the particular features of the yoga of the Gita? It is highly student centered, and therefore provides flexibility of the path. which means that each individual is different, each student or seeker is different. And to some, it may come more naturally to approach the divine through action. Some, it may come more naturally to approach through knowledge, and to some, devotion may be the most appealing and suitable path. So, to make a beginning, this flexibility has been provided. One can start with any of these three, the the action, knowledge, or devotion. And basically, these three correspond to the three basic tools that we have: the head, the heart, and the hands. The head for knowledge, the heart for feelings or devotion, and the hands for work or action. So, any of these tools that we have for action in the world can be the starting point for approaching the divine. But then, as Aurobindo has brought out beautifully in the essays on the Gita, if one continues on any of these three paths long enough and sincerely enough, eventually one would be practicing all the three. And that's what happens to Arjun. Starting with action, in the middle part of the Gita, the emphasis is on knowledge, and this knowledge leads to devotion. So, this Arjuna's devotion in the Gita is a corollary to the knowledge that he's given, particularly in chapter 10 and chapters 10 and 11. And once he has become a devotee, then devotion also enters. So, one might say to say that when all the three have fused, the triune has become one. The person is now engaged in action, which is enlightened by knowledge and fueled or lubricated by devotion, because devotion is what adds that passion, that enthusiasm for action. And enthusiasm is important because, as Sri Aurobindo said, one of the four aids of yoga is utsaha. Utsaha is enthusiastic effort, it's not just effort. And that enthusiasm comes the most from devotion. So, another important feature of the yoga of the Gita is that all students are acceptable. No matter where you are, what stage of evolution you are, which way you approach the divine, everything is acceptable to Sri Krishna. Then the emphasis is on direction, not on the destination. That is, we move in the right direction, start from where we are, cover as much of the journey as possible in this life, and that is quite okay. We can pick up into the next life. So that's what Sri Krishna assures Arjun, that no effort on this path is a waste, because whatever effort you put in gives you a head start in the next life. You start with those tendencies, you are born into the type of circumstances which will make further progress easier. It will facilitate further progress on the path. And then uh, it is compatible with worldly life, not only with ordinary worldly life. Of course, that is also emphasized in the Gita, Yogastha Kuru Karmani, perform all your actions in the yogic poise. But then something as terrible as a war is also compatible with yoga. That's what the Gita is about. So it's compatible with worldly life. So as you would see, there are so many similarities between the approach of integral yoga and the triple path of the Gita. Sri Aurobindo's synthesis, in fact, if one can has to say that which is the yoga which has found maximum representation in the synthesis, it is the yoga of the Gita. So now let's now see what is it that integral yoga essentially is about. Taking a cue from Hatha Yoga, it does not neglect the body. The body is the basic material frame which we have, and therefore, for it to function properly is important. It should not be neglected. Otherwise, whether yogic life or unyogic life, no life can be lived properly unless the body is in a good shape. So we can use the techniques of Hatha Yoga in moderation. Why I'm saying in moderation is because if one goes to the classics of Hatha Yoga, then one can spend all the 24 hours of a day practicing Hatha Yoga. The result would be the body will become so perfect that one will be able to perform feats which border on the miraculous. And we are familiar with those Hatha Yogic miracles, like walking on water and so on and so forth. But then most of us are not interested in that. And what is the use of such a perfect body if there's no time left for putting that body to any other use, meaningful use? In the same way, just as the body should not be neglected, the mind is the other tool that we have. In fact, the two work together. In all the actions, we are using the body mind complex. And here we get a cue from Raja Yoga. We should take care of the mind. And for that, if we like, we can use the meditative techniques for which we get a very good scream from Raja Yoga. But at the same time, again, we need not go to that extreme where our primary obsession becomes achieving nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, if that becomes the goal, then we can spend all our 24 hours perfecting the mind. Again, no time left for anything else. So, in moderation, once again. And whether it is the body or the mind, whether it's the Hatha Yogic techniques or the Raja Yogic techniques, integral yoga is not a technique intensive yoga. No techniques are specifically prescribed, and no techniques are specifically proscribed either. But all the same, techniques are acceptable to the extent it suits the individual. Whatever is moderate for that individual and whatever is feasible for that individual is quite acceptable, but all the same, keeping the body and mind in good shape is something which is accepted, and therefore Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga have been taken into account. Now, this is something which we do not find in the Yoga of the Gita. So that's why Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, finding a representation in the synthesis is important. Then, the path of the Gita is flexible, but then it seems that there are only three ways to start. In integral yoga, the freedom is much greater. Each individual can carve out his or her own path, depending upon not only the inclinations and temperament and the capacity, but also the circumstances of life. So it gives total freedom to carve out your own path. And of course, as I said, it's not technique intensive. And then it does not reject the world and worldly life. This we get both from the Tantra Yoga and from the Yoga of the Gita. And if we use the guidance available in yoga for organizing our life, then all life becomes yoga. Now, what is the type of sadhana one can do in integral yoga? Sadhana is the personal effort in yoga. And here are some of the clues that we get from Sri Aurobindo's works. Make of thy daily way a pilgrimage, for through small joys and griefs thou movest towards God. So every day can be considered a pilgrimage, that is getting closer to the divine. Our daily life itself is a pilgrimage. And what takes us towards God is both joys and sorrows. Another a set of beautiful lines from Savitri. Thy acts are thy helpers, all events are signs. Waking and sleep are opportunities given to thee by an immortal power. So these are opportunities. All our actions, events in life, events which we perceive as pleasant or those which we perceive as unpleasant, waking and sleep, both, not only waking during the waking hours, but also during sleep, we can get closer to the divine because these are all opportunities given to us by the divine, the immortal power. And then a few lines about pain. Pain is the hammer to break a dead resistance in the mortal's heart, his slow inertia as of living stone. So, traumatic events, difficulties in life, which we may call pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, all that also has a role. And that has also been given to us to break this resistance in the mortal's heart because we resist moving towards the divine. We are quite happy to live in our ignorance. We are attached to it. And therefore, we offer resistance. And that is broken when we find ourselves helpless in a difficult situation. And therefore, pain also has a use. But all the same, with a touch of humor, Sri Aurobindo says, that doesn't mean that you have to invite pain or difficulties because enough of it will come uninvited. O mortal, bear, but ask not for the stroke. Do not ask to be hit. Too soon will grief and anguish find thee out. You don't have to invite them. They'll come on their own. So when all events and everything that happens in life is an opportunity for the practice of yoga, all life becomes yoga. And I try to reduce it to three sort of aspects. One is bringing yoga into our everyday work, working as an instrument of the divine, not being attached to the outcome, not being even attached to the type of work that we do, and uh, bringing this type of an attitude, not expecting any reward and recognition, not even expecting success, being prepared for all types of outcome, uh, an outcome which could be completely opposite of what we expected. All that is the attitude that we can bring into our work. And realizing that we were equipped for this work by the divine, the opportunity for the work has been given by the divine, and the work will be kept, taken to a logical conclusion by the divine, and therefore the outcome is in the hands of the one who has given us all this. So that is the yogic attitude. Then making choices in life. Within the same situation, sometimes we find a choice has to be made, the so called moral choices. And for that, what we depend upon is not conventional morality, but on the psychic being. The psychic being is our inner guide, which not only tells us through a faint but very clear whisper what the right choice is. And if we listen to it, we get immense joy and lasting mental peace. If we don't, because this is a guide that does not insist, it leaves us, it lets us ignore it and opt for something else, which may be emotionally more appealing, which may give us a fleeting pleasure. It may be more, we may opt for that. If we do that, we realize that we have not done the best that we could do. And the result is that we get a sense of guilt and recurrent uneasiness. So, this inner guide is coupled with a reward and punishment system. So, making the right choices is the second important aspect of how we can bring integral yoga into our daily life. Then, the attitude to ups and downs of life. Both success and failure are opportunities for fulfilling the purpose of life, for moving closer to the divine, because that is the purpose of life, approaching the divine, getting closer to the divine, becoming more and more one with the divine, functioning more and more in light of the divine, so that the instruments are undergoing a transformation. They are making more and more spontaneously the type of choice that is coming from the psychic being. And for that, both fortune and misfortune can be helpful. So accepting both with equal delight, both ups and downs. So these are some of the major things which help us bring integral yoga into our everyday life. And if we really look at it, what else is there in life? There's nothing left. If we bring uh, the yogic attitude into our work, if we make the choices at the level of the psychic being, and if we respond appropriately to the ups and downs of life, all life is essentially taken care of, because this is what life is made up of. Now, integral yoga is very attractive. It is easily admired by everyone. We get the applause. There's no doubt about it. What is it that makes it so attractive? What makes it attractive is that people realize it includes at least four major traditional yogas. So it has the best of all these four, and that it does not demand renunciation of worldly life. This is very attractive. Makes it look easy. But then what is it that makes integral yoga easy to admire but difficult to practice? There's too much freedom to carve out your own path. It's difficult to make use of that freedom. It has been observed that if somebody, out of compassion for the animals in the zoo, transfers them from a small enclosure to a bigger enclosure, what do? In the small enclosure, they were going round and round in a small circle. Now that they have been put in a much bigger enclosure, for quite some time, they still keep going round and round in a small circle. They do not widen the radius or the diameter of the circle in which they are moving. So it's difficult to make use of too much freedom. Secondly, the three main things which you, as guidelines, which you have been given in integral yoga are aspiration, rejection, and surrender. Now, what type of aspiration? The mother says in prayers and meditations that the one aspiration that is really important and worth having is to know thee and serve thee better. To know the divine and to serve the divine better day after day. That is the one aspiration worth having. And in fact, we find that there's hardly anything left. If that is the aspiration, there's nothing else to aspire for. That is one single aspiration is enough. But then, how many people are really interested in that sort of an aspiration? That is not what they turn to yoga for knowing and serving the divine. Most of the people turn to yoga for stress reduction, for better physical health, for finding a solution to their disease as an alternative to drugs or surgery. That is what they turn to yoga for. So this aspiration does not suit them. They may appreciate it, but then they do not find that they can admire it, but they do not find it easy to practice because that is not what they turn to yoga for. Then rejection. Everything that comes in the way of the aspiration has to be rejected. Now, once the aspiration itself is not there, where is the point in what will be rejected? Then surrender. Well, that in principle, by and large, everybody accepts because that is in our blood. Thine will be done. Whatever is the divine will, we have to accept it. So we surrender to the divine. But true surrender and complete surrender is a process. It's a long process. So we surrender when convenient and do not surrender when it is not convenient. That is why practicing surrender is not easy. Then transformation of all parts of the being. That is not what people turn to yoga for. And they want minor adjustments in life. They do not want a total change, which is so radical. So now let's look at the question from another angle, just this similar question, but turned the other way around. What is it that people want but do not get in integral yoga? People want a clear-cut division between sadhana time and non-sadhana time. They think sadhana time is the time that you spend on asanas, pranayamas, meditation, etc., the techniques, and the rest is non-sadhana time. This is a concept that still continues to persist in spite of everything. So therefore they ask, how many hours of practice does this yoga need? Which means how many hours for sadhana? Sometimes in the ashram also, you see people ask who come from outside, and some of them have some familiarity with integral yoga, and yet it does not stop them from asking, you are doing so much work in the ashram. Do you find any time for your sadhana? Are Baba, the work itself is sadhana. Huh? That they don't realize. And or what is the type of routine in the ashram? How many hours do you spend on meditation? And so on and so forth. Now, these are the type of questions which people ask, even those who are spiritually inclined and visit places like the ashram. Some of them who have attended many workshops and retreats, even then they ask the type of questions. So somehow this idea of yoga time or sadhana time being for a limited time during the day is very deeply entrenched. Then what are the techniques prescribed? They want specifically. It's not that all techniques are acceptable, but no technique is specifically prescribed. So you make your choice depending upon the time you have available, the capacity that you have, and to the extent to which you want to take your physical and mental perfection. Now that becomes too fluid a reply for anyone to follow properly. So they want the techniques to be specifically prescribed. And there are schools of yoga which say that these are the 26 asanas which everybody should do in exactly the same sequence, in exactly the same way. We don't do that. And for good reasons. And there are people who can appreciate that, but their number is relatively small. People find a more clear-cut instruction much more acceptable and convenient. Then what are the do's and don'ts of life? Tell them bring the psychic being forward. That doesn't give us do's and don'ts the way yamas and niyamas do. People want clear do's and don'ts, even if they look upon yoga as a spiritual discipline and they're ready to at least adopt some part of it. If they want to bring more morality into their life, they want do's and don'ts like yamas and niyamas, not bringing the psychic being forward. Then cannot reduce the integral yoga to changes in their routine that they can try to follow after attending a retreat. In a retreat, when they leave, by then they know that I have to spend this 1 hour on asanas, I have to spend half an hour on meditation, and these are the changes that I have to make in my diet. And then if I have been smoking and drinking, I have to try to give it up. So they know what are the changes that they have to make in their routine. If I spend too much time on screen time, I should change that. If I sleep very late, I should sleep a little early. If I sleep very little, I should sleep a little longer. No, these are the type of things that they learn in the retreat. They know what are the changes that I should make in my routine when I go back from the retreat. They go back, they try. For some time, they make some change. Very soon, they are back to square one because it's not easy to maintain even those clear-cut changes in their routine. So another retreat is always there. Go back to one more retreat. So that is what has become a routine for many people. They're going from one retreat to another, one after another at small intervals. That itself has become a routine. Now, integral yoga does not provide anything of that sort. It is providing, on the other hand, a total change in outlook, which will get reflected in a total change in routine. In fact, outwardly, the routine may look still the same, but inwardly, it has undergone a radical change. Then it doesn't satisfy directly their expectations. Their expectations are that I'll become healthier, I'll live longer, and I'll get mental peace. In fact, most of them don't call it mental peace, they just say, I want less stress. Hmm? I want to be happy and I want to have less stress. A peace of mind is a higher sort of a level than that. Uh, so their expectations are of that type. It doesn't satisfy those expectations directly. Indirectly, it does. Because if they practice what is there in integral yoga, health, happiness, peace of mind, a sense of fulfillment, all that will follow as byproducts. So, but they're not looking for those as byproducts. They expect it directly from what they do. And that integral yoga does not hold out as a carrot that this is why you should practice integral yoga. If you have diabetes, you will be able to get rid of your medication, your blood pressure will come down, or that you will live longer, or that you will have no stress if you follow this particular technique. We do not do any such things, and therefore they do not get what they're looking for directly from the practice of integral yoga. The fact that it comes indirectly as a byproduct is something which is a little too complex. Now, what is it that intrigues people in integral yoga? They find it puzzling. One is carve out your own path. Now, this is again too much freedom, but same time, if you look at it, each individual is different and each individual's circumstances are different. If you put the two together, there will be as many paths as the number of individuals who are walking the path of integral yoga, which means truly you have to carve out your own path, and how to do it just using some basic principles like aspiration, rejection, and surrender, or the four aids on the path of yoga. Now, some of those guidelines are there, but then just using those guidelines to carve out your own path is something which many people find very intriguing and puzzling. Then it does not stop at individual salvation. Even if one is looking for moksha or salvation, of course, the meaning of moksha itself is a little different in integral yoga as compared to the normal sort of concept of what salvation is. But let's not get into that right now. But it does not stop at individual salvation the way all traditional yogas do. It is talking of collective upliftment of the human race. Now, this looks rather puzzling and intriguing, especially when people find that what they do or what the rest of the uh, world is doing does not really seem to be leading to any upliftment of the human race, because difficult to see it. Those who believe in it have that firm faith, can see it in spite of all the chaos and all the evil and suffering that we still have in the world. But they can still see that there's a change going on, there's a ferment that's going on. But most people find it very difficult to accept that that is really happening and that we are moving towards a really bright future in the very near future, in the maybe a couple of 100 years away, but all the same, we are moving in that direction. And that's the sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn are arriving in larger numbers. All that they do find very intriguing. They find it quite contrary to what seems more obvious at the superficial level when you look at the world. So these are some of the things that appear rather intriguing. And because we do not stop at individual salvation, we are looking for a collective upliftment. We say that integral yoga really begins where other yogas end. Now, this again becomes a very puzzling thing. It's not that what is there in the other yogas is not a part of integral yoga. Yes, we do go towards individual salvation. Even when we are looking at collective upliftment, the individual is the unit of the collective, and each individual, even through his own rise in consciousness, is making one tiny bit of contribution to the rise in the average level of the human consciousness. So that contribution is each individual is also making. Maybe is inspiring a few more, that is making another contribution, but all the same, to visualize that as a major goal in yoga, the major objective of yoga, going beyond individual salvation to a collective upliftment of the human race, is something which most people find quite puzzling. It seems nice, it feels good if that will happen, but all the same, it appears rather difficult uh, for them to visualize. In the first place, why was the synthesis that Sri Aurobindo worked out really necessary? Now, as he points out within the first few pages itself, that synthesis became necessary because the specialization of different schools of yoga, like Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, had gone to such a level that the external form, what was easily visible, had come to subordinate the spirit underlying yoga. And that Sri Aurobindo says is quite understandable. And the way he says is that you always start any major human endeavor with a broad idea, and then once you have pursued that idea for some time, there will be individuals who are trying to follow that, but then take special interest in one small corner of that idea. And by devoting exclusive attention to that small corner of that idea, they develop it. And that becomes a school of specialization. Like, say, in yoga, some people paid greater attention to the body, and that became Hatha Yoga. Some concentrated on the mind, and that became Raja Yoga, and so on. So, there will be individuals who will lay greater emphasis on one small aspect of that broad idea. And then it can reach levels where that broad idea itself is forgotten, which means the spirit gets subordinated to that extreme degree of specialization. And that is what had happened when Sri Aurobindo looked around. And it was to revive the spirit of yoga, which had come to be subordinated by the techniques, by what is visible, that he worked out this synthesis. Now, has this reason really disappeared? If most people still continue to look upon yoga as a set of techniques, it is primarily the form that they are looking at, not at the underlying spirit. So, that reason for which the synthesis was designed, that reason is still valid. The fact that there is a central principle which is common to all schools of yoga, which is the spirit of yoga, which needs to be revived, which is far more important than the external form, is something which has not really taken deep roots in the masses. It's not that nobody understands it. Yes, a lot of people do, but all the same, it has not become a mass phenomenon. While yoga has become extremely popular, this idea that there is a spirit underlying yoga which is more important than the outer form has not become equally popular. Uh, so that reason, in fact, applies even today. Why that synthesis is necessary? Of course, Sri Aurobindo has been extremely objective and very sort of fair in dealing with the schools of specialization. And because he says that that type of development, the degree of development that took place in each of those specialized schools would not have been possible without exclusive attention to that particular aspect of yoga. So, if you keep looking all the time at the broad idea, then one would not have developed the uh, methods for physical perfection to the extent that it happened in Hatha Yoga, and the same applies to the mind. So, that degree of development in that particular area would not have been possible if we kept pursuing all the time the entire broad idea with which we started. So, specialization makes it possible to take that development in that area to that level only because you are exclusively attending to that aspect. So, that concentrated attention is what leads to that degree of specialization. But at the same time, the spirit underlying yoga got forgotten, as happens in any major endeavor. So, that's why to revive the spirit, synthesis was necessary. And then once again, Sri Aurobindo gives credit to the schools of specialization by saying that this synthesis will in fact be more powerful than the original idea or the spirit of yoga with which we started. Because now the synthesis has the benefit of the schools of specialization. So we have taken the particular features of the different schools and incorporated in the synthesis, which means the synthesis has benefited from these schools of specialization, which was not available in the original idea because at that time these schools of specialization did not exist. So this synthesis is a far more powerful synthesis than the original central principle with which the difference with which yoga started. Now, this is a degree of complexity which most people don't get into. And that is why we find that the outer form still continues to find much of the emphasis in yoga. But all the same, uh, one can see the extent to which Sri Aurobindo went into the depth and detail of yoga. And in fact, he has talked about the technique also in considerable detail. He's talked about Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga in considerable detail, at least at 2 points, uh, two major chapters in Hatha Yoga and two major chapters on Raja Yoga and the synthesis of yoga. So he has talked about all these, but then not in a way, once again, that uh, is there in the classics. For example, in asanas, he does not enumerate the asanas and tell the exact way of doing them. Rather, what he emphasizes is the uh, immobility of the body, that is the central thing in the asanas. And that is because, like the mind, the body is also inherently restless. So, to cure the restlessness of the body is the main thing for which the asanas have been designed. And that is what Patanjali also says, prayatna shathilya. That is, your asana should become effortless. It will become effortless only when that restlessness has been cured. Now, these are the type of things which general public is not really much interested in. In fact, sometimes just the contrary. They want even yogic postures to resemble a bit like the activity in a gym, a vigorous, fast, energetic activity. They're not looking at it for curing the restlessness of the body. But then, unless the body has achieved that state of restless or of immobility, inner immobility, and the mind has done the same, the right background for approaching the divine has not been created. So one can approach the divine through the body and one can approach through the mind. But then the important thing is this restlessness has to settle down, and then only that background will be created so that one will be able to go deeper. The way you are able to look at the uh, lines in a swimming pool only when the water is at peace. In a turbulent swimming pool, one can't see clearly the lines at the bottom of the pool. So that is what happens in the case of the body and the mind. One can't go deep enough to connect with the divine if the body is restless or the mind is restless. And depending upon the inclination, some people may approach through the body and some through the mind and some through both. And that is possible. But then it is possible to approach the divine through any part of the being, be it the body or the mind. So the original reason for which the synthesis was worked out has not totally disappeared, but all the same, the synthesis will remain a major sort of a beacon of light to all those who are looking at yoga from a wider and deeper angle. Now, here are some of the major works which give us the basic sort of philosophy and practice of yoga, the way Sri Aurobindo looked at it. The Synthesis of Yoga, which was written during the Arya period from 1914 to 1920. And this small but very powerful booklet, The Mother, which has talked about the three pillars: aspiration, rejection, and surrender. And of course, a lot else, which is of great value. Very small book, but very powerful. And it was written in 1928, 8 years after the Arya period. And 2 years after Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry had been considered to have been established formally. And this probably became necessary because Sri Aurobindo wanted to give something simpler by way of guidelines so that those who are not able to go through the 800 pages of synthesis of yoga can still get the basics. And aspiration and rejection and surrender are the three basic things in in integral yoga. And of course, besides this, we have plenty of works from the mother, which are in the form of dialogues and questions and answers, which are available as complete works of the mother, which give us a very practical guidance on the practice of integral yoga in the real world. And similar guidance comes from Sri Aurobindo in the letters on yoga, which were also written after the Arya period when he was in seclusion. So the 4 volumes of letters on yoga, and again, those 4 volumes can be intimidating, but then some selections from those letters are available in many forms. And one of the selections is the Integral Yoga Methods of Teaching and Practice, which is about 300 pages only. And it has classified some of the selected letters to some extent subject wise so that they become sort of those which are dealing with the same subject have been clustered together. So these are some of the important resources for understanding and practicing integral yoga. Then here are two books, yours truly. Uh, of course, the inspiration and everything comes from Sri Aurobindo and the mother. This is a primer on yoga, which has a chapter each on Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Tantra Yoga, and the Yoga of the Gita, and 2 chapters which look at yoga in a broad way. One is the introductory chapter, and another is uh, the integral yoga, the all in one yoga. So these are the basic chapters which sort of are designed on the same lines as the synthesis of yoga. And besides that, there are more than 30 frequently asked questions on yoga which have been answered. And then uh, there is now a QR code. Initially, we had a DVD with the book, a QR code which takes you to a video on the physical practices yoga, and the instructions that have been given in the video have also been printed in the book. So this is just about a 150-page book published by the National Book Trust and has done extremely well. It was brought out during the year the International Day of Yoga was declared, that is during the year 2015. The book continues to go strong and has been reprinted several times by now. There's another book which goes a little deeper into the spiritual philosophy. And for this, inspiration comes more from the Life Divine and Savitri than from the synthesis of yoga. This understanding spirituality and living it 24/7, real questions, rational answers. This book has now been published by Motilal Banarsi Das Publishers, who have been publishing books on Indic wisdom since 1903. More than 100 years they've been publishing it. So now that it has been published by a reputed publisher of this type of books, it should be more easily available all over the world. It's available on Amazon India, Amazon UK, and Amazon US. This is a picture postcard view of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, where I live and work. And this is an online learning platform, Yoga Education and Spirituality, abbreviated as YES. This is a platform that was compelled by COVID and inspired by the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. It started primarily with an online course on teaching yoga. And Aditi, who is now an integral part of Uditam, as she was one of those limiting factors without whom this platform would not have taken off. So she was the person who was indispensable because I was not tech savvy, and she is the one who helped start it. She and some other youngsters gathered around me and pushed me into this online work. But then what she did was indispensable because she brought just the right combination of abilities and her circumstances, which made it possible for her to devote a lot of time by staying for several months at a stretch in Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch so that this platform could materialize. And the byline for this is yoga is education. If education is about change, if education is about learning from experience, then yoga is itself is education. And then education in schools and colleges is incomplete without spirituality. Because like yoga, if that education also focuses only on the improvement of the performance of the instruments, the body and the mind, then that will suffer from the same flaw as yoga would if it was not a spiritual discipline. So education remains incomplete without spirituality. And in fact, putting spirituality into practice, bringing it into daily life is what yoga is about. So sort of becomes a circular thing. And one could have fitted everything, education and spirituality, also in yoga itself. But then for making it convenient for uh, the people who tend to see these divisions, we have all these three words there: yoga, education, and spirituality. And since 2022, which was the 150th birth anniversary year of Sri Aurobindo, was also the 75th year of India's independence, uh, you can see a flavor of the national flag in the logo and the way these colors have been chosen. We have these YouTube channels. Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch itself has a YouTube channel, and then this online learning platform has another YouTube channel. So please do visit, and if you find some content which is of interest to you, do subscribe to these channels. And you can also send me an email so that you can be put on our mailing list, and you'll keep getting inputs from Sri Aurobindo Ashram as Delhi branch, as well as from the Yes Online learning platform. My email address is easy to remember: RAM for Ramesh, BIJ for Bijlani, and work to indicate that I hardly work. So Rambij work or Rambij work, whatever you like to call it, at gmail.com. Gratitude to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for making the session possible. And love you all. Thank you all for being there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramesh Bijlani. This was such a, I would say, comprehensive things put together. And I'm sure that it's not only about those people who are, trying to know more about Sri Aurobindo Mother's yoga, but even for those who feel that they are also in Sri Aurobindo, they follow. Even for them, this was such an eye opener. The way you put the things, I would say, one of the very important insight from my side is that these are so many things that run in the background of the mind, and like behind the curtain these thoughts run in subconscious mind, and the way you frame them together, the way you structurize them, you made it so simplified. I'm sure it it even though the talk is about 55 minutes, but the amount of work, the amount of life that you have lived in order to put this together and articulate in such a simplified language, and that too helping us through PPT to make it understand this good. Enormous gratitude to you. We are so blessed to have you. I'm sure in a very subtle manner, I'm trying to tell you that we are going to repeatedly request you to guide us in future also. And, if in case you have time and we can take one or two questions, if they are, can we? If you have.
Sure, I have all the time. No problem.
Thank you so much. If there is any question or query or insight to share also, please be open the forum.
Let me ask one question. In integral yoga, there are three steps, right? Inspiration, rejection, and surrender. As you mentioned, there is one inspiration should have that's mentioned by the mother. Can you explain it some briefly? That inspiration should have by one person. What in
You want to know a little more about aspiration? I, what I
sorry,
said
it's
was,
aspiration. Sorry, not
what I
inspiration.
said
Aspiration.
was the one aspiration that the mother has said we should have. But apart from that, the other general things about aspiration are that the aspiration should be sincere, intense, persistent, but not impatient.
Angadi, is that a question that you have typed? Can you unmute, Angadi? You're saying something, but we can't hear. Is that a question that you have typed?
Yes, yes. I have this question, sir, that you referred to Tantra, and it's not really clear to me. Will you please elaborate about connection between Tantra and its relation to physical, physical and work? Some link you referred to. I remember in those initial slides. So you were saying about heart and those three things you said, no? Hatha yoga, uh, and Raja yoga, the yoga of the mind and heart. So the third one was some tantra thing you said. So can you please elaborate again, sir?
Tantra, you see, basically is about using everything that comes naturally to us, or some anything that has been planted in us, or anything that is there in the world, being suitable for approaching the divine. And Sri Aurobindo, sort of matches fairly well with what Sri Aurobindo said at one place in Savitri, that nothing is in vain that the divine has created. So everything has a purpose, including all the instincts and all the impulsions and that have been planted in our vital. So they also have a purpose. And since all this has been executed by nature, that is Prakriti, the executing power of the divine, uh, Sri Aurobindo points out that it is only in Tantra Yoga that Prakriti is the deity to be worshipped. In other yogas, you are approaching, say, the divine as Purusha. It is only in the Tantra Yoga that the Prakriti is the highest sort of deity to be worshipped, which means the manifestation itself is the highest, and that is the way to approach the divine. The execution itself gives us a clue to how to approach the divine.
So,
Yes,
Doctor,
sir.
if
Does
there,
that make it a little clear?
So clear
Yeah.
now. Okay.
Doctor, if there are no other questions, maybe I can ask something which is slightly not necessarily in the nature of yoga itself, but something you had mentioned about uh, progression across lives, which obviously is it's repeated in scriptures at different points. Uh, one th- one thing I notice is that this is something which does recur, although it is also contravened in just the telling of other stories, right? In the scripture itself, and but I just wonder whether it's something which is posited there just to provide some kind of motivation for, for continued effort, versus as a dictum of having a better birth in the next life and so on, especially because I see that also being misused equally to kind of often blame the poorly born for whatever reason, and in a different form the effort is never wasted, because if the generations can improve over time, then definitely all of us will be better off in the next births, to the extent that we advance lok sangraha. Then wherever we are born, it's the next birth will be a better birth if the world is a better world, that's for sure. But getting a better birth because you were born, or being at a more advanced of knowledge because of what you did in this birth, obviously it's not provable or disprovable, that's for sure. But is that something which is what just wonder about your thoughts on that? Is it just offered out as some kind of consolation prize to make people feel better, or really a robust part of the understanding?
Well, there are a few things which I may like to say in connection with this. One is that it may sometimes appear that it is a sort of a teleological approach to the whole thing, that because it appears to be useful, that becomes an incentive for accepting it. Useful in the sense, if you do something good, it gives you uh, some peace of mind, good health, etc. in this life. It also gives you a better place where the soul will transmigrate after death. And it also ensures better circumstances, more conducive for spiritual growth in the next life. So you are gaining in this life, life after death, and also in the next birth on this planet. So looks like sort of makes it more attractive. Uh, it is that if we consider the point where we are and the final goal of union with the divine as the goal of every soul, that every individual, then we also realize that this is a journey which is so long that most of us will not complete it in one lifetime. And that's what Sri Aurobindo says in the Life Divine, that that makes rebirth a logical necessity. Now, the fact that it has some use, some consolation, as well as consolation also in the sense that, well, in this life I may not be able to complete, but at least it gives me a head start in the next life, and it has use everywhere in this life, afterlife, and the next life. So apart from this consolation and being a rational necessity, the fact is the starting point of these truths is neither of these. Probably the starting point is the observations made by the rishis at a level higher than the mind. So they are not for wishful thinking or for consoling us or to make it logical. These things are there because they were actually a part of the rishis' experience. These truths have been experienced and then they have been knit into a philosophy. So the starting point in Indian philosophy, spiritual philosophy, is the experience, not mental excursions. So we don't start with mental excursions. The Rishi has first observed, and then after that, the Rishi himself or some others who have looked at the observations of a large number of Rishis, they have put together a philosophy which is consistent with all those observations of the Rishis. But these are basically observations which are suprasensory, which are extrasensory at a level higher than the mind. But all the same, they are observations. They are a part of the Rishi's experience. And logically, we cannot question, if we do not have that experience, we can't question that such an experience itself is impossible, just because we don't have that experience. I often say, I think you might have heard this argument earlier also, that suppose a scientist says that this leaf, which looks like a green sheet of paper, is actually made up of thousands of cells. And we say, I don't believe you. I don't see the cells. So if I don't see the cells, how I believe that there are cells? Then what will the scientist tell us? The scientist will say that you will see the cells if you use a microscope, because I used a microscope for seeing I saw those cells under a microscope. So if you also use a microscope, you will see the cells, which means that to make the same observations which the scientist has made, there are two things which are necessary. One is we use the same method, that is the microscope. The second, that we should have faith in the microscope. Because if we believe that the microscope is not just magnifying what is actually there, but the microscope is creating images de novo, images of something which doesn't exist. It's just a sort of a tool for creating images. Then again, we will not be satisfied. So we have to use the same method and have faith in the method. The same thing the Rishi will also tell us. If you don't believe my experience, follow the methods that I used, then you will also have the experience. And what is the method that the Rishi has used? Now, these methods that the Rishis and the mystics across traditions have used have been put together very elegantly by Aldous Huxley in his book, The Perennial Philosophy. He says that the methods which all these mystics and Rishis across traditions have used have basically two simple, a combination of two extreme degrees of concentration or intense concentration and extreme degrees of self purification. These are the two basic things. And in fact, one follows from the other. Because if you are passionately involved in finding out something, the concentration will be intense. And if the concentration is intense on any one thing which you are pursuing in a single minded manner, then many other things which are ordinarily found interesting will drop out from your life and life will get simplified. So intense concentration and extreme degrees of self-purification, which is a result of this simplification of life, have been the two basic ingredients which all these rishis and mystics have used. Be it the rishis of the Hindu tradition, or the mystics of the Christian and the Judaic traditions, or the Sufis of the Islamic tradition. They've all used a combination of these.
Thank you so much. I guess discussion will be continued.
Sure,
I should-
and that's what the beauty of, or you can say the weakness of the intellect is. No matter how convincing what I say might be, you can always have questions which can question what I have said. And we cannot reach a conclusion. It cannot lead us to a certainty because we are talking about an experience which is beyond the level at which we are talking. But then when coming to rebirth, I mean, there are, again, I think with a aim, the divine has been sending occasionally people to this planet who remember where they were and what they were in their past life. And those things have been verified and again put together in a few books here and there. I'm not forgetting the names right now. Those names are there in that book, Understanding Spirituality, where a few lives of some people who remember about their past life and which have been verified by going to those places where they say that they were, and all details that they have provided, all those have been verified. So a few people, I think, keep getting born who know about their previous life, and that probably the divine sends in this world to create in us faith in this idea of rebirth.
No, absolutely. No, so actually, I paused because there may be other questions, so that's why I didn't want to monopolize your time, which is more valuable. And this is slightly a side topic, but something which is very central to something that I am trying to look at in the because so the cell part of it, no, absolutely, that's certain things observable is through certain methods, but then becomes a shared experience. The reason to question that is in this case is because different yogis reach slightly different conclusions. They're not exactly the same. They are slightly different conclusions, and the other things, like even if you look at our mythology, right? So, for instance, if you think about Jay and Vijay, right? You can call it a myth, but let's say it's a part of the spiritual compendium. So they were so close to Vishnu, and they're doing their duty also in terms of stopping Bhrigu because Vishnu is resting, and that curse causes them to be born as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksh. Like what can be more monstrous than that? Okay, then to be liberated. The other question that comes up is Jiva Mukti. I do believe in, and 100% on that. But if you achieve Jiva Mukti, then why the need to be liberated from rebirth? It's perfectly fine for Jiva Mukti to feel I'm happy to be born again and again and again and again achieve Jiva Mukti every single time. Then it would be equally fine, right? And if everybody who's achieves mukti never is reborn, then the world will progressively become a worse place rather than a better place. So why not keep contributing in a positive fashion? That those are the questions which kind of some logical, some looking in the mythology itself. I mean, obviously, you can call it mythology, or different names can be used. I mean, I know that mythology has a certain connotation as being ahistorical, but I'm not using it in that sense. And again, we can continue it. You'll have a series of lectures, so we'll hopefully I'll arrive at the truth through.
Well, I'll attempt to respond only to the first part that you started with. The rest is quite a bit is based on mythological tales, and in those tales, which were primarily written to simplify things and make them more interesting, there are many contradictions, there's no doubt, in mythological tales. But what you started with was that does the experience of all the rishis and mystics have to be identical? If they're all experiencing the divine, is it always identical? And if it is different, then how does it correspond to a truth that really exists? Now, that is again something which the mother has talked about, and she says, why should we expect that the infinite itself should reveal to the different rishis and mystics in exactly the same way? The one who is infinite in its dimensions can present in any of those infinite dimensions, and every rishi doesn't have to see all the infinite possibilities in the experience. So the variety of those experiences is understandable, but same time, in spite of that variety, there's certain common thread that runs through all of them, and that is what Aldous Huxley has brought out in the perennial philosophy. He has put comparable experiences recorded by the rishis and mystics from different traditions at one place to show that there's still a common thread running through all of them.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much once again. We'll conclude on this note, and tomorrow morning we have a session, practice session online again, and also in Mathniketan for those who are in Pondicherry. Tomorrow evening again we have session. So till Saturday the series continues, morning practices as well as evening sessions, and hopefully see you all tomorrow morning and evening as well. Thank you so much once again to everybody. Wishing best of luck. See you.